Hey, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about the Acura Legend and, unfortunately, its condition. When we went down to the National Acura Legend meet in Santa Fe, New Mexico this year, we had some weird occurrences with the cooling system. We seemed to struggle with the cooling system on this car, but some things just didn't feel right as we got closer to Santa Fe, New Mexico. As the temperature increased, we were noticing that coolant was expanding over into the reservoir, but it wasn't being replenished. So we had this situation at the National Acura Legend meet when we went to Kentucky, but we thought we nipped it in the bud with the replacement of the radiator. Unfortunately, it was still happening, but it's happening less frequently. It only seems to happen under extreme conditions. So temperatures that are really warm or extreme driving conditions where we're really up in the RPM range. And, the National Acura Legend meet, when we were keeping up with everybody in the group, we were really pushing the car and we saw it basically rear its ugly head. While we were there, we tried to bleed the coolant out, and unfortunately, we arrived at the conclusion that we have a head gasket issue. And we'll go ahead and put some clips in from me trying to get back to Vermont after the meet, and you can see that I was struggling with trying to make sure that the long trip back wasn't fought with a lot of issues with the cooling system. But what that means is that we get the opportunity to take this car apart and show you now how to do a head gasket repair on these cars. As most of you know who are Legend enthusiasts, head gaskets are quite a common occurrence on these cars, and unfortunately it seems this car, even with its young mileage of just 135,000 miles, it has been apparently neglected in its previous ownership to the point where the head gasket has failed. And no matter what we have done, and we have done a series of things, as you know, to improve the cooling system on this car, it just seems that that is the natural inevitability with these cars, is that you find yourself needing a head gasket replacement. So we're obviously going to do a bunch of while you're in there's. We'll get to show you that. So without further ado, we'll start getting it in on the work to replace the head gasket on our 92 Acura Legend.
Good morning, everyone. So heading back to Vermont after NALM this year, and as I mentioned, I found out that this car has a head gasket issue. It was probably there before I left, but it has progressively gotten worse as the journey has gone on. What it's doing is pushing air into the system, which is overwhelming the thermostat and pushing fluid from the radiator into the overflow container. So I'm going to have to periodically stop, check, and see what's going on. How much fluid has it pushed out of the radiator? Do I have to then take the radiator overfill and then use it to refill the cooling system by entering it into the radiator? Good thing is that, and I don't recommend doing this obviously, is to make sure that the pressure of a hot radiator, even with low fluid volume, isn't going to burn you. So I'm going to be extremely careful in this process to make sure that I don't burn myself, but the process is fairly simple. I'm just going to have to use a Lyle funnel, or what they call a spill-proof funnel, to take the fluid, put it back in there, and basically expel as much of that air out of the system as I can, and then go on my way. Now, I could certainly stop the car, tow it home, and I might end up having to do that, but we're going to try this method. Let's see how far we can get. I'm keeping an eye on the temperature needle. One concern I have is that if there's air in the system, is it able to actually read appropriately? Because the sensors on top of the passageway, as you know from my previous video on replacing sensors for the cooling system, it sits right on the top of that aluminum housing for the coolant. And in theory, the exhaust gases produced and entering into the cooling system should be hotter than that of the coolant. You could debate whether it's air, whether the sensor could read appropriate air or not, but either way, it does bring some concern whether it'll be enough to actually read it. So am I going to do damage to the engine? That's a question that is lingering in the back of my mind. We'll see here. I'm going to drive probably for the next hour or so until I find breakfast, and then check it out. Alright, so I just traveled about 170 miles. Figured I'd get some gas because I'm quite a ways out from Amarillo. Everything's looking good so far. So I think my theory is correct, that it's only seeping when it's heat soaked. And when it's heat soaked, it's creating little micro fractures within the head gasket, likely, causing it to introduce air into the system. So if I can keep this engine cool, and if I can keep the RPMs low and keep the stress low, I think I should be fine. This also might explain why I was able to drive half of the trip with no signs or symptoms at all, and why when I drive it normally around town in my hometown, there's no issues. So I'm going to continue documenting this just because this is so curious to me, how we've got some head gasket issues going on, but they're not there all the time. So this is like a precursor to a bigger issue, and I don't know if this has ever been documented for the Acura Legend community. So this is very interesting. We'll see what happens here once we hit some hills and some perhaps more strenuous temperatures.
Alright, let's go ahead and get started by lifting the release for the gas door and removing the fuel cap. This will relieve the pressure in the fuel system, so when you disconnect the fuel line to the fuel filter, fuel won't come spraying out. Next, we'll go ahead and start with a time lapse here and show you how we just basically remove everything on the front end of the motor, including the intake box and some of the throttle cable assembly linkage. We generally just work from the outside, so basically working in a way where you're focusing from the outside to the inside. And the reason why we do that is because we want to clear everything away from the engine and work our way towards the middle of the engine. Here we'll go ahead and remove most of the hose assemblies that connect in, like the fuel line and the brake booster hose and a lot of the ancillary vacuum hoses that this engine has. Once we have the bulk of the stuff connected from the outside, we're going to work our way onto the inside by removing the throttle here. This is, throttle body assembly is pretty easy to remove. Just 4 bolts hold it on and give it a little couple whacks with the hammer. That allows you to remove it. Then you can remove the linkage and fully get that out of your way. There are a couple hoses that connect to the throttle body, specifically the IACV area, as well as some of the throttle body passages for making sure that your throttle body doesn't freeze in the wintertime. These hoses will cause fluid to drain out, so if you didn't drain your coolant ahead of time, this is when it'll start to leak out a little bit. For me, I went ahead and just put a pan underneath to catch any of the coolant that leaked out. Very little amount. Switching over to the left side of the engine, I start by removing the engine ground that connects to the valve cover. Then I'll start to remove some of the vacuum hoses on that side, as well as some of the electrical connections. This will allow me to remove the engine harness that drapes in front of the engine and over the top of it. As you can see at the top of the engine, there's two wiring harness bundles. Both of those will have to come out so that we can gain access to the injectors, as well as remove the harness off the top of the head so that you can eventually remove the heads, because those will be in your way. At this point, I'm taking out the front of the engine harness protection cover. There's a couple clips that hold it on. I use a flathead screwdriver typically to remove this piece. Next, you want to use a pick tool to go ahead and release all the injector clips. Once you have all the injector clips, you can then remove some of the harness and lift that out of your way. This will allow you to have more access to the engine top area, so you can start working on the next piece, which is this pipe right here. Basically, it's rinse and repeat on the other side until you have everything disconnected. You do want to start removing your ignition coils off on the top side of the engine. I like to make sure that each one goes back into the previous location when I do reassembly. So you'll see me take everything apart and then mark which cylinder number it is. So that way when I go for reassembly, I'll know which coil goes into which hole, so I can remove a variable if I end up having an issue with a coil. Everything you're doing up to this point is really about getting the intake manifold off. So you can see here I'm trying to release the injectors, the fuel injectors, so I can pull the whole fuel rail assembly off, and that's what I just did. This will allow you to have access pretty much to the bolts that hold the intake manifold on. Then you can remove that complete assembly. There's a few hoses on the back side that you need to remove, such as the EGR passage pipe, and I believe it's called the suction pipe from the exhaust manifold to the intake manifold. So that's what I'm working on right here. On the back side of the intake manifold, here's a couple of hoses that are hard to reach, but you're going to have to either cut those and get new hoses or get them off. Assuming you've done everything correct to this point, you shouldn't have anything attached to the intake manifold. Now you should be able to loosen up the remaining few top bolts that hold the intake manifold onto the engine block and to the adjacent cylinder heads so that you can lift the intake manifold out. You'll see here in this video I did forget something, but I went back and caught myself, went ahead and removed that, and then I can remove the intake manifold. What I'm showing you here in this footage is the two knock sensors below the intake manifold. Since the intake manifold really holds in the heat, it's a situation where these really do fall apart even if you just breathe on them. I was able to save the right one, but the left one fell apart as soon as I touched it, as you can see in this clip. So I had to remove both and I opted to replace them. They are a little pricey, but it's a bit of work to get the intake manifold off, as you can see, so might as well just start new with these. Crescent wrench, and you can unscrew them by hand. What I'm going to do next is remove the timing belt covers and go ahead and loosen up the timing belt. And that will allow me to slide the timing belt off the two cam sprockets. This will then eventually lead me to removing the cam sprockets, which is one of the first steps in removing the actual head. Not that it's absolutely crucial at this point, but I go ahead and turned the number one cylinder to top dead center. That way I know where everything should be at reference. There are markings and keyholes for the sprockets, so you don't have to necessarily remember this. You can go ahead and complete assembly and then turn it to top dead center. I'm going to go ahead and clean the internals of the engine anyway, so I'll probably adjust this when I get to that point, but for this purpose I wanted to be at top dead center for cylinder number one, which is why you saw me turn the engine. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and loosen the tension on the timing belt. This will allow me to slide the timing belt off the cam sprockets. You want to remove the first one on the left. You can see there's still a little bit of tension on that belt, but it'll eventually start to slide off. If you then grab the belt just a little bit, you can see how the tension releases. This is something that you could try that I didn't do, which is use the timing belt tension to allow this cam sprockets to hold in place just enough so that you can loosen the bolts. You can see here I had to use an air gun just to get those bolts off the cam sprocket. That's because a traditional wrench wouldn't work. You can see I tried again on the right side, but ended up having to go with the impact gun. I had to remove the relay assembly holder for the cooling fans to gain access. Here I'm just removing the bolts that hold the cam sensor on. Once you remove the cam sensor, you can then remove the backing plate to the timing cover. To gain access to the driver's side head and the subsequent exhaust manifold, you must remove the circuit panel here, the fuse holder panel. There's a couple bolts that hold it on. Once you loosen it up, you'll then release all the wire connections at the bottom of it. All right, so I've got my floodlight set up here so I can see a little bit better into this space. But to give you an idea of where we are with this, we've got basically everything taken off and we're ready to remove the valve cover. And the reason why I say the valve cover for last is obviously we don't want particles and debris and everything to get into the cylinder heads. I mean, obviously they're going to get cleaned when we take them to the location. They're going to go through them all, make sure that they pressure test out. But I want to make sure that we're not introducing any unnecessary debris by our work. So a couple interesting things that I discovered, besides the fact that we had someone at some point use gasket maker to basically gum up that pipe and not properly seal it. We also had some issues with the O-ring right here. It looked like it was starting to fail and leak maybe a little bit. These wires that go to the knock sensors on both sides, they are super brittle looking. So I'm gonna think about how I wanna heat protect those in the future. And then the other thing is these knock sensors, I was able to salvage one, but the other one I wasn't able to salvage. It basically, I breathed on it and it fell apart. So not a big surprise when you talk about how much heat is probably coming off this engine and the fact that it doesn't have a great way to dissipate and cool off in a timely fashion. So a couple other things that I've noticed along the way, we have some power steering leaks occurring. I think I'm going to do a rebuild. And when I say rebuild, I mean reseal. All of these hoses are just 30 years old at this point, and factory original. You can see the dots on the top there, and they look like Japanese markings on them, so they're probably original hoses. Also, we've got the heater valve core here, which is notorious for failing. It's just made out of plastic, so it becomes very brittle over time. But yeah, a lot of things, just kind of 30-year-old age things, some maybe quick maintenance jobs that this engine has seen in the past. But we're really at the point now where we've got the exhaust manifold unbuttoned from the pipe that goes down on the left side. I'm going to pull this one out and then I'm going to see how that goes before I attempt to do this one. There's a little bit less working space over there, and we also have to remove the alternator bracket. So I figured I'd start with this one, kind of proof of concept, how I'm going to take it out. That way you can see that process, but that's where we are right now. Overall, pretty easy to this point. I could probably get this done in about 3 hours to where I am right now. Depending on how rusty your bolts are and how much tools you have at your disposal, it might take you a little bit longer, meaning I used an impact gun to get the exhaust bolts off. So just FYI on that. Probably soak them in PB Blaster, which is something else I did. I soaked them and let them sit for a couple days, since I'm only going to occasionally work on this. I'm not going to This is going to be more of a restoration grade project at this point. I found enough things that I don't like going on with the condition of hoses and wiring that I'm really going to focus on how to make this car last another 30 years instead of just focusing on the head gasket issue, which I kind of realized going into it. But here we are right now. Not a bad job at all to this point.
It's pretty self-explanatory at this point. I'm going to go ahead and remove the valve covers now that I've removed enough to be able to gain access to the heads and remove them. So I'm removing the valve cover here, which will then give me access to the head bolts.
All right, let's go ahead and bring you in on what's going on here. So we've got the valve cover removed. We've got the exhaust bolts loosened up there. I'm going to take the heads off with the manifold intact here so we can just lift everything out. I think that's going to be the better option for us, all things considered. So we'll see how that goes. After talking with a couple people, that seems to be the preferred option. So we do have some head bolts here. These are not torque to yield, so you should be able to reuse these without any concern. A number of us in the community have done this very successfully and reused them. You could upgrade to ARP bolts if you wanted to. They're pretty pricey. If I remember correctly, you have to use B series head bolts for this job. I priced it out and I was like, that is not worth the price to do that. So we're going to reuse these, and I have no concern with it. Like I said, a number of people have done it before, but there is a sequence here. So let's go over the sequence. Okay, so the sequence is you look at the front of the head. So this is number 1, that's number 2, that's number 3, that's number 4, and you keep on repeating that, kind of closing into the center using 1/3 of a turn. And the reason why you want to do that is because it will prevent warping of your head. Not to say that you're not going to address that by taking it to a machine shop, but let's go ahead and show you the book. So here's the front of our camshaft right here. So 1, 2, 3, 4 is the sequence, and you can see right here you're doing a 1/3 turn at a time. Repeat all bolts until loosened, and the reason is to prevent warpage. Also, we're going to use the book reference here to pry up right there and release the pressure on the head. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing that right now. That's how this procedure is done. So I'm really not going to show too much. It's basically that. So I'll just show when the head's off here, or getting ready to take off.
I went ahead and loosened up the bolts as I described in the previous section. So this is just basically getting all the bolts off so that I can then pry up on the head and remove the head. So real quick, I discovered that on the bottom bolt of the head in the far back, you need to remove the ABS shield cover. So I didn't do that, but it's real easy to do. It's only 3 10mm that hold it on. I hit the head with a mallet a couple times to loosen it up, and now I'm prying where it says so that you can remove the head.
Okay, let's go ahead and bring you in on the driver's side work. So unlike the passenger side, the driver's side has a assortment of brackets and things that need to be removed to get out of the way. Additionally, you've got this exhaust gas pipe that goes from here down into there, which attaches to your exhaust manifold. So I'm gonna have to remove that to get everything out. Some of this stuff is like really not fully disclosed in the manual. It's kind of like simplified in the manual, if you will. But I went ahead and removed the alternator completely. That's probably a little unnecessary, but you can see how much oil is right there. That was from the years of the valve gaskets or valve cover gaskets being, in bad shape and leaking, that coated everything down below it. I tried to clean it up when I first got the car, but now that I have the space to get in there, I'm going to go ahead and clean up everything and start to degrease it all. I went ahead and removed all the belts just to make it easier. It's probably not completely necessary to go down this far, but I'm going to do it anyways. I was thinking, as I'm going through this, why not just pull everything apart, get everything fixed up, all the little hoses, all the little things, and so I'm just going to tear it all the way down. One little thing that did come up, which is a little concerning, is there's a little bit of cylinder wall scoring. You can kind of see it like right there, just a little bit, and that's where the head gasket was leaking, is that back cylinder, and it's pretty typical. I think that, and this is just pure speculation, that this car did sit for a little while, didn't really drive for a while, a couple years, and I think that the water or the coolant leaked into that cylinder and just sat there and kind of corroded it. Just a tad. It's not significant, but it's a little concerning. Either way, I think we can run it just fine. It doesn't actually do anything. Like, you can't even feel it really with your nail. But it's just an indicator that this car was probably parked for a while and had a little bit of coolant from that head gasket leak. Going back to the fact that this car probably had a head gasket leak for a while, just was so small and minute that it didn't really show signs. You do have to remove some of the hoses, like this coolant hose that goes into your heater core. Now, obviously we're going to replace all that, but it's just easier to slit a little cut into the hose and pull it off. They're really stuck on there. And as soon as I did that and I moved it a little bit, this hose completely cracked like Rice Krispies. It just kept on cracking. So it's just, another sign that we just need to go the extra mile and make sure that we do this right. Next, we're just going to pull off the remaining few brackets, that pipe. You can see how somebody put some gasket sealer on there to, I don't even know why you would do that instead of just putting in the right gasket, but nonetheless, that's what they ended up doing. We'll remove the valve cover here and start to remove the head shortly. All right, we've got the second head off the engine, and it gave us a little bit of a challenge. Ideally, we would want to take this pipe off, but luckily we can take the manifold all off at once. And the reason why I say that is this bolt right here, somebody installed that while they were probably trying to do maintenance on the pipe here and clean it out, and then put the wrong bolt in and then ended up stripping it. So normally I take this off and then take this off, but you can see I tried to do that by loosening this up, but I couldn't get this off. Well, I got to figure out how to get that bolt out and put the right one in. But that all said, we've got the heads off. Pretty simple process all in all, really. Just a lot of brackets on the back there that hold everything together. But now we've got really good line of sight to all the caked up oil from that valve cover gasket leaking. So we're going to clean all of that up while we're in here. And we have to do all of the hoses. But all in all, this process to this point probably took me about 4 hours, I would say. Maybe a little over 4 hours. I did spend a lot of time trying to get that bolt out, probably about a half hour alone on that before I realized something's not right and that thing's probably stripped. Exhaust bolts were a little challenging. I ended up just using an impact gun and got some of the studs out. So 2 of the 3 studs just came out and not the bolts. Not a big deal though. We'll go ahead and take care of that. I am going to strip this block all the way down in the front. I got a new timing belt coming in. That is an OEM water pump that is still functioning, so I'm not going to replace that. We're going to clean up everything here. It's probably going to be a little while before we get to that. I have to really do a good assessment of what it is I need to do now that I have access to a vast majority of the engine. I have This side blocked off right now because I don't want there to get any more debris into that side. I'm going to have to clean up the pistons a little bit. They look really good. They just look like they've got 130,000 miles of questionable maintenance on them. It could be the fact that this car just naturally burns a little oil through the valve stem seals, and the PCV wasn't probably functioning before we got this car correctly, so it was probably sucking in a little bit of oil. But everything else looks pretty good, just a lot of cleaning, and we'll get these heads off to the machine shop and get them decked.